Hey, everybody. Woo! Thanks for hanging around. It's the end of the day. Most of the time, we're done, right? We go home, we're going to go get a drink at the bar, and I went to the last session, but I didn't really. But you guys are faithful. You stayed. I'm impressed. My name's Eason, and I'm super excited to talk to you about DevOps today. I was just joking with some former colleagues of mine about how a few years ago, when I interviewed for this position for Director of DevOps, I had no idea what DevOps was. No idea. Have any of you ever interviewed for a position and you're like, I don't actually know what this is? Yes. Awesome. So for the last 3.5 years, I've been at this company called Ipreo. Ipreo is a financial technology company. Yeah, we're going to edit that out of the video, by the way. Ipreo is a financial technology company. So we had about 30 different products that we sold to the financial markets that did all kinds of things. So we sold some products to municipalities. They would raise bond raising. You know what bond raising initiatives are? So there's software somewhere that manages that, and we built that software. So 98% of municipal bond raising in the US happens on our platform. That's like pretty serious market domination. We also sold software to big banks like Merrill Lynch and Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and they use our software to take companies public. So they manage the IPO process on our platform. So like the vast majority of IPOs happen on our software for that as well. So Facebook, Alibaba, Snapchat, most of the time when you hear about these tech IPOs, they're happening on Ipreo software. So we're one of those players that's sort of behind the scenes, but nobody knows who we are. We also have products for private companies that help them do things like keep track of their valuation, sort of like figuring out what to list your house at, like what criteria do you use for that? It's sort of complicated. And keep track of things like stock options. Who's ever had like equity allocations in a startup? Right, that's surprisingly hard to keep track of, and I'm sure you'd appreciate it if the CEO would do that. So we create software that your CFO or your CEO uses to keep track of equity allocations. And then we got bought over the summer by this company called IHS Markit. And so we went from having 30 financial services products to 60, and now there's 500 end-user-facing applications that do all kinds of crazy stuff, like figure out the cell phone reception quality of different carriers, and also transport oil from this place to this place. It's all over the place. Really exciting. So my goal for today is to talk to you about this transformation that I've been leading Ipreo through over the last 3.5 years. I want you to leave here with a better understanding about what it means to try and change the way that lots of people go about doing their jobs. And that's what a DevOps transformation really is. So we're going to be talking a lot about people today. I hope you're okay with that. And we can't really get started on this until we have a good understanding about what DevOps is. So everybody that gives DevOps talks gets to share their definition. I'm not going to pass up my opportunity to do that. DevOps is about continuously improving your technical processes. Really, at the end of the day, when I hear about companies going through a DevOps transformation, what you're really doing is you're dealing with habits that have been built up over the last 5 to 10 to 20 years that have been reinforced by annual bonuses, by executive performance reviews, and baked so solidly into the way that people think that they no longer consciously think, they just do. And you're confronting these habits when you're dealing with enterprise DevOps transformations. You're trying to uncover that story. Why do people do the things that they do, and how can I get them to act differently? It's not an easy problem to solve, okay? It's actually really painful. Anybody in here a long-distance runner? Ah, you crazy bastards. So I run too, but only because I have to. Running is painful. Most people don't run. Most people hate exercising. We do it, though, because we know there's a positive outcome on the backside of it. It's amazing. Humans will endure a lot of pain if they understand and believe that the benefit is going to be worth it, right? So when I'm talking to people and trying to coach them about big-scale organizational changes, it's painful. We need to be realistic about that. But the payoff is worth it. So this is what the payoff looks like for Ipreo. When I joined the company 3.5 years ago, we had a centralized release management team that would take in tickets from all of our different 65 or 70 some odd application development teams. Those tickets were called RFCs, And they would execute those changes to do things like release my application version 5.6 into QA, or release my application into production, or make this database change, or drop this DLL here, or get me these logs from this server, right? We did over 900 of those types of things every month. And if you looked at the amount of time those tickets stayed open, it added up to over 350 days per month. That's a lot of friction, right? We want those things to be easy and painless. We want to do them often. And yet we had this process in place that was painful and time-consuming. Okay? So at the end of this transformation, when we look at the way Ipreo does things today, we do almost no manual work like that. And the number of days of delay is down to essentially 0. That's a tremendous amount of change over 3.5 years, and it's really hundreds of people changing their behaviors. If we think about the way that that change has to go in, right? So let's think about the details of this a little bit. We had to take a release management team and change what they were, essentially remove them. So we can't have a release management team. We can't have that central bottleneck anymore. The answer to our problem wasn't just new tools. That's why I'm so glad that the DevOps conversation has evolved beyond just talking about tools, because that's really not what it is, right? If I had just given new tools to the release management team, we would not have taken those 350 days of delay out of our monthly work. It would have been a small incremental improvement. What we had to do was we had to change the operating model of the company. We needed to change the release management team and transform it into an internal tools team that manages a toolbox of tools, that provides a capability that all of our application development teams consume to pursue their own DevOps journey, right? And again, what is DevOps? It's continuous improvement of the code build and deploy process. So that's something that your dev teams have to do. And they are enabled to do that by an internal tools team and that toolbox. And they're taught how to do it by that internal tools team who manages that toolbox. But they have to do the work. That's a big shift in thinking. It's much harder to do than just trying to change how the release management team does their work, right? Because now I'm dealing with dozens and dozens of teams instead of just one. So as we think a little bit more about how does the value of that type of organizational shift manifest, right? We talked about manual work, but root cause discovery is massively faster than it used to be. When we think about what does that enablement actually get my business? Okay, so back in 3.5 years ago, remember we were doing 900 tasks per month with all that friction. Well, what do we get for that? What's my return on that? We could barely deploy our applications 100 times a month across all environments. 30 applications across all their different dev, QA, demo, test, performance testing, production. That's not very much, right? It's really difficult to actually innovate at the right pace. We're going to talk more about that in a second. Today, we deploy regularly today over 9,000 times per month. So it's not like one-to-one. It's not like I'm still deploying at the same rate. That change enabled my business to move so much faster than it was able to before. We're refactoring our legacy applications faster. Here's a newsflash for you. When something's really difficult, we don't do it that often, right? That's sort of a core principle of automation and DevOps. So when it's easy to deploy changes to production, suddenly I'm not so scared to start refactoring legacy applications because it's not going to be as painful as it was going to be otherwise. We're also talking about things like quality and net promoter scores. So for us, it was a 24% drop in Sev 1 and 2 defects. And when we look at net promoter scores across all of our different lines of business, the teams that are the furthest along on their DevOps journeys, the ones that are doing things like zero downtime releases and have figured out their database automation properly and are deploying more frequently, their customers are happier than other areas of our business. And by the way, this is all sort of predicted by the Puppet State of DevOps report. If you look at that data, it's pretty clear that these are the types of benefits you're going to see. So it's been really neat for me to watch Ipreo's transformation over the last 3 years really track right along with what the industry sort of said. And that was actually a big part of getting buy-in for some of these changes. We'll talk more about that in a sec. So we've understood the value, right? These are things I think probably everybody in this room is pretty familiar with, but the reality for Ipreo is very much there, right? Reduction in manual work led to faster throughput, better velocity, higher quality, blah, blah, blah. We get that stuff. All right, but what made it hard? What were the things that were the hardest things for us to deal with? What were the big boulders that I had to push through, or that we had to push through? So there's kind of 3 things we're going to talk about: executives, culture, and we're going to talk about team health. So first of all, executives don't understand DevOps. And that's actually okay. That's to be expected. Why don't they understand DevOps? The bigger the organization, the further the separation between your business leaders and the direct contributors, right? And in a really big organization, that's like a Gulf of Mexico-sized thing. It's a huge separation. Even if your executives have a technology background, which they probably don't, they probably have a background in finance, legal, accounting, sales. That's typically where your senior business leadership comes from. But even if they have a technology background, the landscape of technology changes so fast that in my experience, actually, it's more of a detriment than a helper. I have a harder time dealing with business executives who purportedly have technology backgrounds because they're dangerous. They think they know what's going on, but they don't, because the world that they grew up in is so radically different today than it was then, right? So it's like, I think I understand your world, but you really don't. So I spend more time trying to help them understand what's real today than I do someone who starts from zero. That separation is actually okay. That's an okay thing, and you should embrace that. Don't fret too much over the fact that these folks aren't technologists. That's not their job. That's your job, okay? Now, some of my colleagues I've heard them say, like, listen, you're wasting your time with the executives. All they need to know is that you're here to fix the release process. And actually, when I first joined Ipreo 3.5 years ago, that's exactly what our executives thought. They said, oh, Lee's coming in to fix the release process. And I could have just stopped there. That's sort of true, right? That's technically true. We are going to improve the release process. But here's the problem with stopping there. The problem is when your delivery teams have a deployment error, and that story bubbles up to those business executives, what are they going to hear? What they understand is that you're there to fix the release process. When they hear that you broke it and made it worse, that's where you get really fun declarations and laws that get issued. And those declarations look ridiculous to a technologist. It's like, you can't deploy code until it's sat in the repository for 24 hours. That's a real rule that I've heard in some companies, right? Other rules are like, the only people that can deploy code to production is the release management team. We pay these people to deploy code to production. Why are the application teams deploying their own code to production? That seems broken, and they can't do it right, and so we're going to let the professionals deploy code to production. I don't care what they do in the other environments. Lee can go do whatever he wants to over there, but when it comes to production, that's the release management team's job. So when those declarations happen, the issue is you've lost credibility because you've been going around talking to delivery teams and painting this great picture and this great story about what things are going to be like after we get through this change, but you can't follow through on it. And the executives have sort of cut your legs out from under you, right? You've lost credibility. Those delivery teams aren't going to trust you anymore because you've proven to them that you don't have the support and buy-in of business leadership. So your job has just gotten a lot harder. It's much easier to build credibility ahead of time, build support ahead of time than it is after the fact, after an incident like that. And I've seen this happen at Ipreo. We've had deploy incidents. Everybody has deploy incidents. It's going to happen. If you change something, you're going to break it every once in a while. So making sure that they understand how you're fixing the release process, what that process is going to look like, is really important to keep their support through that transition, okay? There's kind of two key areas I want you to think about when you're dealing with executives. Number one, challenge constraints. Don't ignore them. Like I said, most of your business executives have backgrounds in finance or legal or sales. When they raise an objection like, hey, Lee, you're talking about giving people more access to production than they have right now. I think we have contracts that are going to be a problem there. Don't say, it's not an issue, we'll get around it. Like, that's not the right response. The right response is, I understand that could be an obstacle. I'm actually already partnering with our head of contracts. We're auditing our contracts. And I'm also partnering with our head of account management to start having some conversations with our key customers so that they're aware of it, because I understand this is a relationship issue as much as it is a contract issue. What you're doing is you're telling the executive, I get it. I understand that this is a potential problem, and I respect the fact that you've spent decades of your life managing these types of relationships and contracts, and I'm not going to ignore those things. So you can trust me. It's okay, right? Turn that kind of objection into an opportunity. Don't lose credibility by ignoring it. And I joke here that we have DevSecOps, so maybe we need DevSecReg LegalOps. We can hashtag that. Another thing I want you to think about is metrics. All right, everybody talks about metrics. They're super important. Don't ignore metrics. Never ignore metrics. But the way that I want you to frame metrics in your head is metrics are an opportunity to build a bridge between a business executive and the delivery teams. Now, like we've said before, delivery teams are dealing with technology that's rapidly evolving. The state of the tools and processes that they're using today are radically different than what they were even 5 years ago, okay? So we can't expect business executives to stay up to speed with all those details. Metrics are an opportunity to abstract them away from those details and help them focus on the things that matter, that are common between the delivery teams and the executives. All right, I'll give you an example. You always start conversations about change by trying to talk about what are the goals, what are the objectives, where's the pain point. If you hear something from an executive that sounds like, listen, we started this company 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had no competition. There was nobody else in our space. Nobody did what we do. But today, we have all these new competitors popping up. It seems like every other week I'm hearing about somebody else trying to do this, and they're out-innovating us. Our teams can't keep up. It takes too long for us to get changes into production, and our customers are constantly asking us about these things, that these capabilities our competitors can do, but we can't do. And it's taking too long for us to get stuff done, and we have too many quality issues, and I'm feeling the heat from our competitors. Okay, you understand this confluence of business and technology. Your job is to listen to that story and figure out what are the behaviors, what are the things happening on our teams that are contributing to that story? And what are the metrics I can put in front of this business executive that my team will understand and this person will understand and care about? So in that story, our metrics that we're going to focus in on are what? Lead time and defect escapes, right? You know what the behaviors are. You know what the inhibiting things are on your teams that are keeping them from improving those metrics. So you can go off and focus on those activities. The executives don't necessarily need to know all that. But they do need to understand those metrics, and those things become your key performance indicators. When you go to the team, you tell them the same story. Don't tell them a different story. You sit down with them and say, listen, folks, 10 years ago, here was the state, but this is where we are today, and here's the metrics that we're going to use as our North Star that's going to guide us to a better outcome. All right, so let's talk more about that. You've got executive buy-in now. You understand, you've got a good relationship with your executives. You know what's important to them. You've got some metrics that they're bought into. They understand how those metrics affect the business outcomes. Now you're starting to deal with the delivery teams. I'm really excited, like I said, in DevOps, we've made this shift. We're no longer hyper-focusing on toolboxes, which is good. We're starting to talk about behaviors. Here's the thing. This is what I've observed, and this might be controversial. I think tech people suck at influencing behaviors. And the reason for that is because I think most tech people think that getting someone else to change their behaviors is a dirty, icky process. Right? I felt that way. I still feel that way. In fact, the day that I realized I was a salesman and no longer a tech person, I took a really long, hot shower, to try and scrub off the salesmanship. But the fact of the matter is, the root word of the word manage and the root word of the word manipulate are the same word. Oftentimes, the difference between those two things is just in what's motivating the person who's doing the influencing, right? Your job is to influence the behavior of other people. If you don't feel like that's something that you want to do, then you're not a change agent, and that's okay, but don't try and devote yourself to being a change agent if you're not interested in understanding how people think and influencing their behaviors, okay? So when we're dealing with this kind of stuff, we've got to kind of get into the psychology of how people work. Most rational people behave according to their values. There's some inset, collection of values that they've developed over the years that governs their behavior. Most people aren't aware of these things. And certainly when you get to an engineering department in an enterprise company that's 10, 20 years old, there's very rarely going to be like a nice, aligned, everybody's bought into this set of engineering values that governs our decisions. That's not generally how it works. Those things typically get backed into over years and years and years. So you've got to start to tease those things out. You're almost like a forensic detective. You're trying to figure out what are the values that are driving the behavior of my engineering teams, software and infrastructure. How did they get to those things? What's the story? All right? So I'll give you an example of one. Let's talk about efficiency and cost saving. And by the way, I like to put values in contrast to one another because sometimes it helps people understand what I'm talking about. So here's a story for you. Company started, and they're scrappy, right? In the beginning, there's not a lot of money. I think people sometimes generally think companies just have infinite money. Oh, we're running low on money? Well, let's just go raise some. Well, it's not that easy. That's not how it works. Companies have checkbooks. They have finite amount of money. They have the same problems you have when you're trying to manage your personal finances at home when your air conditioning breaks, like mine did this summer. It sucks. If you don't have the cash for it, guess what? You're going to be hot, right? Companies are the same way. So if they have this new product they're trying to bring to the market, and they think they have some buyers for it, right? They've got some people that have like letters of intent. Yeah, I'll buy it if you have this thing. But you got to get it into production first. And you've spent all these months on research and development. You've written all this code. And now you're trying to get that thing out into production. So you go to the engineering teams and you say, hey, folks, we've got this code. I need 5 backend servers. I need a SQL Server cluster. I need these offline workers. I need this queuing system. And the engineering guys are like, well, that's going to cost, $75,000 in CapEx for new servers and hardware. Well, guess what? We don't have $75,000. In fact, if we don't get this product into production, we're not going to make payroll in 3 months. So you don't have CapEx. You've got to figure out some way to get that product in production with what you have on the shelf right now. Right? So the engineering guys pull off a miracle. And they get that application running on all the existing hardware. So you've got IIS servers that are running multiple sites. You've got a SQL Server cluster with multiple databases. You've got one load balancer serving all this traffic. Right? You've got one queuing system and all the workers for multiple applications. And it's a rat's nest. But it worked. You got the thing out into production. You sign the contracts. You save the day. Company grows. Awesome. Great work. How many times do you go back and fix that problem? Never, right? You never go back and fix it. Because then there's the next thing that comes up, and you got to get the next product. If you play that movie for 5 years, how fun is it going to be to work on that engineering department? It's not going to be fun, right? And who's supporting that crap? It's the engineers, right? They're the ones that are on call. It's a miserable experience. Nobody sat down and said, I really want it to suck to work here, right? Nobody was like, what would be really great is tight dependencies on our infrastructure layer. That should be our engineering value number 1. Tight dependencies, tight coupling. Nobody does that. You back into those values over years and years and years, and those kinds of situations that come up again and again and again. It's not like anybody had a bad intention or mismanaged anything. It's just a reality, okay? Understanding that story is going to make you a much more effective change agent than someone who comes in and throws stones. If you're joining an organization as a change agent, do yourself a really big favor and never make fun of your predecessors. Never poke holes in it. Don't mock decisions that were made before you got there. Trust that those things were made with the best of intentions and people did the best they could with what they had at the time. You will gain much more credibility and reputational capital with your coworkers if you operate that way. It's really tempting not to, but don't. Understanding these values is going to give you a really strong position to start to have conversations about why you need to change behaviors, okay? So as you tell these stories and you're working with the engineering teams, being able to identify these things and be very clear about these things and say, listen, this is the state of the company. This is how this situation came to be as it is. This is the behaviors that led to that. But look, folks, congratulations on growing the company to this point. But we are not going to hit this next level of scaling if we continue to operate this way. So whereas before we may have valued getting something out the door at the expense of quality because we didn't have competitors and we could afford to make mistakes, we can't do that anymore. We have to value quality above speed now because otherwise our competitors are going to snap up our customers from us because we're giving them so much ammunition to use against us. Being able to codify what the values were, put a stake in the ground, and then codify what the values need to be, they give you this common platform to start to drive a bunch of behavioral changes across your organization. Team autonomy and centralized processes is another really great contention point for a lot of enterprises. Centralized processes are really easy. They're really safe. It's something that people can wrap their heads around. It's also a productivity killer, oftentimes. So in places where you don't need those centralized processes, trust team autonomy over that. But you're going to have to be able to sell that story to people, and you need to be able to frame it and that sort of, here was our old values, here's what they produced, here's what you're saying we need to achieve, and here's the values that are going to get us there. And now let's start to think about the behaviors that are going to come from this new value structure. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind as we deal with values and principles, it's all very fuzzy, right? There's no laws. We're not passing the Ten Commandments and then writing a bunch of knock-on laws from that, right? That's not what we're doing. We're dealing with principles and values. These things are not free-for-all tickets. There's still a finite amount of money. So even though we might say, hey, listen, we value team efficiency over spending money, in other words, we're fine spending money if it gets us some team efficiency, there's still a limit. There's like a finite amount of money to spend. So you need to spend it wisely. Be prudent with that stuff. We're going to talk more about team capability in a minute, but information security is another great example. You may have contracts that actually limit who has access to certain types of data. Don't just skirt around those things. Like we said, don't ignore constraints. Figure out what those constraints are and work around them. And then one more thing I want to note here about metrics. We said metrics are a great opportunity to build a bridge between business executives and operational teams or delivery teams. It's also a really great opportunity to reinforce your values. Think very carefully about those metrics and the values that they purport to support. I'll give you an example. If you say that you value quality over everything else, but you measure how many hours your engineers estimated a task was going to take, and you punish them when they're off on that estimate, what message are you really sending? Are you sending the message that you care about quality, or are you sending the message that you care about quality of estimates and how many minutes you spent on a certain task? Right? So your metrics reinforce values, and they send a very clear message to your engineering team about what you really care about. Be careful that you don't have dissonance in that messaging. In other words, don't say that you care about one thing and then measure something else that's opposite to that. Right? You've got to think really carefully and critically about those metrics. Okay, last thing I want to talk about here is team health. Now, I'm going to be really honest here and say that this is something I did not value and really understand when I started this process at Ipreo. I kind of took for granted that people would just evolve and, naturally learn everything and be masters of everything like I am. That was a joke. It is actually really, really important to think about team capability and team health as you're making all these changes. I actually just wrote an article about this on LinkedIn if you want to hear more of my thoughts on this. But the bottom line is that transformation is the new normal, right? This idea that, oh, things will just calm down once we get through this public cloud migration. No, forget it, man. Because the technology that drives that public cloud is changing faster than ever before. And you will constantly be having to learn new things, and your business will constantly be shifting because of that technical capability. So you need to embrace that chaos. You need to build processes that keep your teams healthy in the midst of all of this constant change. So let's walk through an example of what this actually looks like. So this is an example DevOps maturity model. Never take somebody else's maturity model and just use it without changing it. Make sure it's realistic for your organization. This is something we're actually working on right now at IHS Markit. But let's walk through this maturity model and just look at sort of that. Let's see on this projector, it's sort of like a bluish color. So let's talk about this story. All right, so in our maturity model here, level 1, we have an engineer. This is real stuff, right? Let's think practically. There's an engineer, a software engineer on a team, and we're saying, listen, somebody on this team has got to update our build process. We need an automated build process that's going to run every time code gets checked in. So there's somebody on a team who's making a change. Give me a name of an example made-up person. Brett. Yeah, the Phoenix Project. Nice. So we got Brett. All right. So Brett is a software developer. He writes C#, and he's like, hey, look, I'll take this on. It's fine. I'll figure out the build process. So Brett goes off. He takes the task. He implements an automated build process. He gets the hooks built into the code repository. Let's say he's using GitHub Enterprise or something, and now he's got those things connected together. Great job, Brett. And the team says, listen, we want to keep improving. We care about DevOps, so level 2, what's that? All right, well, now Brett goes back into the build system, and he updates it so that it actually outputs a Docker image. And it gets stuck into Artifactory or Nexus or something, and it's versioned, and there's metadata, and it's beautiful, and it gets, he even figured out how to tag it back to the issue tracking system, so you've got nice traceability between the versions, right? Great job, Brett. Then we get to level 3, and we say, hey, listen, to get to level 3, we need to take that automated image now, that Docker image, and it needs to get deployed to QA. Who's going to do that work? Probably Brett, right? More than likely, Brett's going to do that work. And so he's going to go in, and now he's going to update, and he's doing a whole different kind of deployment automation now. This is not like build automation. This is a different kind of automation. So he's learning Chef or Ansible or something like that. And he's writing automation that's actually deploying the app. Brett's learning a lot, right? The team is maturing through these maturity levels, but Brett is learning a lot of cool stuff here. Level 4, now immutable infrastructure. He's thinking about blue-green deployments. He's thinking about infrastructure as code. So there's even more Ansible, more Chef, where he's got AMIs getting built automatically. Brett is rocking and rolling. By the time we get to level 5, Brett is like knocking it out of the park. This dude is a freaking genius. And the whole team is like, holy cow, we're going so fast. This is amazing. And then what happens? Brett gets a new job. Brett takes a job as a senior principal DevOps engineer down the street. He's a block away from where he was just working, and he just got a 30% raise. Right? Good for Brett, bad for the team. This is a real thing that happens all the time. How many times have you guys been on a team and you've heard something like, well, we can't really estimate that because John's on vacation, right? This is what's actually happening. We're changing the DNA of the team. We're going in and we're saying, look, there was all this stuff that other people used to do, right? And now I want you to do it. And so we are changing the concerns and the skills that that team needs in order to be healthy and to deliver their product on any kind of reliable schedule, right? All these things are new for this team. And if you're not managing this carefully, it's not going to go well. Again, we've got that situation where we can't estimate this work, but there's other problems too, right? How many times have you been on a team and somebody at a stand-up says, well, I couldn't get that done because I have a cross-team dependency on this other group, and their person is out that set this up, and no one knows how to change the load balancer until he gets back or she gets back. And this stuff happens all the time. And I think that what's happened is we've just come to accept that this is just the way software development is. We just accept that there's these key person dependencies on all of our teams, and that's just the nature of the beast. But that's terrible. Like it's a bad experience for everybody, because here's the thing. If you're irreplaceable, you're unpromotable. You can't go and take on new things. You can't get challenged. You can't take on some new project because everybody depends on you to do the things you're doing today. But we let these situations happen. The fact of the matter is our teams are under constant entropy, which means that they're constantly trending toward a bad state. Managers and team leads have a responsibility to manage against entropy. If you're not managing against entropy, then it's going to go bad. That's just the natural direction that it's going to go in. The problem is most of our line managers don't think about this. This is not on their list of things. They wake up in the morning and they think, they're in the shower and they're like, my God, we have this production issue and there's performance problems and I don't know how to deal with this employee relations problem. I've got this HR thing I have to go to. That's the stuff that they're thinking about. They're not thinking about, is my team healthy? Are we sharing skills evenly across the team, right? The tragedy here is there's this huge opportunity in learning and development on our teams. People overwhelmingly will feel more engaged and happier in their jobs if they feel like they're learning new things and gaining responsibility and having opportunities to take on new challenges. That's a fact, right? There's a mountain of evidence that points to this. I've got some other slides I can link you to if you're interested. Hit me up on Twitter. I've got pages of studies on this. People want to learn. They want to have challenges. Even if we're talking about something like, because again, remember, there's sort of two different types of skills at play here. There's sort of general skills. I can go out to the market and hire for them, or I can buy training for them. This is like JavaScript, C#, Angular, unit testing. These are general things you can get. But there's domain areas too, right? Like I have my account sign-up page, and I have my order fulfillment system or something like that, or my email sending module. Those are domain areas. People are more motivated typically to learn general skills, but you learn general skills in the context of a domain area. So even if we're talking about a skill gap on your team where it's like, I don't have enough people that know the front end for my account sign-up system, well, guess what? People want to learn Angular or React or JavaScript. So look across the company where you have some JavaScript expertise and let them refine those skills and learn the account sign-up system. Now you've killed two birds with one stone. That person's going to feel more engaged. They're going to stay at your company longer. They're going to do better work because they're learning more skills, new skills, and you're de-risking your account sign-up system. So I had a big problem when I was trying to manage this at Ipreo, and I started to understand the scope of this problem. I couldn't find any tools to help me with this. So like kind of all cards on the table here, I went out and I built my own. This is a free-to-use thing, so I'm not selling you anything. You can go to takata.io and sign up. I'd encourage you to use it. We've got a bunch of big companies that are using this now to manage their transformations. So what you do with Takata is you can go in and define your teams, you put your people on the teams, you kind of list out the skills that they need, and then just subjectively rank them, and the tool will help you visualize where you have key person dependencies, where you have skills that don't have enough expertise spread across them, and make good decisions about hiring and training, right? And then you can kind of make a continuous improvement process around how are we sharing knowledge and expertise of our skills that we need to be successful across the whole team. So it's helping you de-risk over time. And again, it's going to drive better engagement of your employees too. I've seen this go badly for teams that don't manage this proactively. This is a big, big problem in our industry. I'm really hoping we start to get more aware of it because I think it's a bigger inhibitor to productivity and improvement than people think. So kind of wrapping up here, click, 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 nope. Wrapping up here, there's sort of three big areas I want you guys to think about as you're dealing with kind of large-scale organizational shifts, whether it's DevOps or Agile or everything, but definitely for DevOps. Think about your executives. Use metrics to build bridges. Teach them what you're doing and how you're doing it and why. Don't ignore them. Bring them along for the ride. Make them advocates and supporters. Number two, as you're kind of dealing with change and behavior changes, think about values. Think about reading books like The Wolf in CIO's Clothing, read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, think about psychology, think about behavior, and have conversations about that stuff. Forensically figure out what the values were that got you to today, and then what do the values need to be to take you into where you want to go tomorrow. And then finally, don't ignore the health of your teams. Please, 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 whether you use takata.io or something else, use a spreadsheet, it's fine, I don't care, but focus on figuring out if your teams are healthy, what's the current state, what are the skills they need to be what you want them to be, and then manage that proactively. Don't wait until you have somebody leave your company to figure out that you had a key person dependency. That's too late. Okay? That's it. I'm done. Boom, 45 minutes on the dot. Questions? No questions. Perfect. Yeah.
Because I think it has a huge benefit, but I know that typically on teams with developers, you've got a lot of introverts. They're going to be very resistant to that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that's big. So the question was, how do you drive things like pair programming when you're dealing with a bunch of introverted people that don't like to interact? That's a tough one. I think in general, if I was going to unpack that question, the biggest thing in there is how do you deal with introverts? So as an extroverted guy, I screwed this up for a really long time. I was really bad at it. I thought, oh, you know what? We'll make this better if I just make this person talk in front of his peers. What a horrible way to do it, right? So I think for me, the first thing I had to learn was how to empathize with people who don't think the way that I do, who aren't energized by the same activities I'm energized by. That was kind of one thing. So specifically with pair programming, how do you get introverts to pair program? I think you've got to find a way to set good examples. So maybe that's you. Maybe you get your hands dirty and you write some code and you show them what the good outcomes that come from pair programming are, or use some other team as a good example. If you have no good examples on your own team, kind of saying, hey, listen, can we shadow over here and watch how this other team does it? We're just going to watch them do a pair programming exercise and see what comes out of that. Code reviews are the same type of deal, right? I think it's a little more obvious with code reviews, but because pair programming is a little bit more of a trailing indicator when you're talking about health, right? Because I need to pair program a good bit in order to feel like I've increased my expertise on an area of the code. So another thing you could do is maybe set some shorter goals, like, hey, listen, we only have one person on our team that knows how to do the account sign-up system, okay? And that's a really big problem because when he went on vacation last week, he had to get called. And no one likes to get called when they're on vacation. So listen, for the health of the team, we need to have somebody else that's able to step in and do this type of work while he's gone. So, John, why don't you're the best at Node.js and you're the best at whatever, so why don't you pair? And the goal then, John, is next week or 2 weeks from now, we want you to be able to do a task on your own and not have to have anybody help you. So like, if we do that, we're going to get pizza for the team or something crazy like that, right? So you're setting some sort of like short-term, concrete thing that shows like, hey, this exercise led to a good outcome. So, hey, pair programming is a way that we're going to help you get there, John. I know there's just other things we're going to do too. That was long-winded, sorry. Other questions, anybody? Thanks for asking that. Yes? Good way to display metrics.
Like the DevOps metrics you had.
Yeah. So a good way to display metrics. There's tons of tools out there that you can pump metrics into. I mean, you can use Splunk if you have that available. You could use Power BI. We're using that for some metrics now. You could use a spreadsheet. The thing I would say is, one of my goals is to make it as easy as possible to track that stuff. So what I'd rather do, rather than like manually go out and gather those metrics once a month, is if you can wire your systems into some kind of monitoring tool, whether you're using Splunk or Prometheus or Power BI, like set that up in an automated fashion so that it's very easy to track these things. Because I've tried to do it manually, and I find that in the beginning you're doing it really regularly, right? But you have other jobs. So then the gaps between when you're checking these things get longer and longer and longer, and then after a while you just stop checking. So if you can make it simple and easy by manipulating your toolbox to pump those metrics out on their own, that's the way to go. But as for what you use, I think you got lots of options there. Hopefully that helps. Yes?
So what is the one big thing in your transformation efforts that you would do differently today?
Oh, the one big thing. So, I was talking to my friend Magnus about this earlier. I read this book called How Google Works, and Eric Schmidt was talking about how he does these radical, totally open retrospectives on his performance. So I actually wrote one of those for fun. And the one big thing that I called out on myself was, I wish I had done more baselining of metrics in the beginning than I did. So you saw some of those, like you saw the days of delay and the number of manual tickets, but I didn't do enough there. Like I wish I had mean time to resolution from 3.5 years ago. I wish I had better metrics about lead time. Some of those things are really hard to track, but gosh, I wish I had them. Because I think that's the real meat and potatoes of the outcomes that we've driven, but it's really hard for me to prove that. I kind of have, there's just too many steps, right? Where I say, oh, we do more releases and the change sets are smaller and the quality's better and customers are happier. But really what I want to be able to say is, hey, that idea that you had, we can get that into production in 3 months instead of 12. That's the real value. But it's very difficult to tell that story because I didn't do enough baselining in the beginning. So if I went back and redid it, I would make myself get those numbers, even if it's just a snapshot of that stuff. Even if it's just subjectively asking product owners, how long does it take you right now to do this? And then just ask them again 12 months later. I just didn't do it.
Good information.
Yeah, great question. Yes?
I guess, are there any kinds of like skills that you can't, like, I can think of skills that aren't easily transferred to other people. Like you got a guy who's really good at like, who's a data scientist, and that takes like years of learning, of like going to school and learning the underlying math. That you can't really replicate across a team, or like if it's unrealistic to replicate across a team. How do you sort of, do you ever encounter that? Did you ever encounter that when you were doing stuff? And can you did you learn how to differentiate between like things that should be replicated and things that shouldn't or can't be replicated?
Yeah, that's a great question. The other one that comes up a lot is soft skills. So when I built Takata and we populated it with all these hard skills, the first thing people started asking me is, can you put soft skills on here? Can you put like presentation skills on here? Which might be another one, right? So I guess for things like data science, and I totally agree, that's a really specialized, like niche, almost capability. You got to understand stats and p-values and stuff that I don't know anything about. So I think there are patterns out there. If you look at the Netflix model where they have strong central teams that sort of farm themselves out or build capabilities that everybody else consumes, those might be areas where you just say, you know what, we can't get away from having a central team for this because it's too specialized. But we're going to shore it up as best we can, and we're going to make the interaction model for this team. We're going to build a playbook for them or something like that, which is what we're doing for our DevOps consulting group now, where we're going to have like an enterprise DevOps playbook. So when a team comes in and they say, we want a cloud account, we'll say, you can't have that until you go through this playbook and you prove that you have enough responsibility and capability to use that tool. That might be a kind of approach that you could use there. For things like presentation skills and soft skills, that's a harder one to me because you do have to have, like I think, I got into a LinkedIn argument actually with somebody the other day about this where he was like, EQ is stupid. We shouldn't teach EQ because it empowers sociopaths. And I was like, are you insane? Like, that's crazy. Of course we need to teach EQ. Like, people need to work on that stuff. You can't have a central team to do EQ or soft skills or presentation skills. Those are things that I think are harder to drive, but it's still important. You still got to do it. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions? I'll be sticking around if you want to chat. You can look me up on LinkedIn at Lee J. Eason. I'd love to chat with you guys. If you think you've got some other questions or you think there's something here that you didn't quite jive for you, that's totally fine. I'd love to hear about it. Okay? Thanks so much for sticking around. Appreciate it.